Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today, I am talking with Dr. Kufar Phobia, and we're going to be talking about a book that he created over a long period of research called Challenging the Standard Islamic Narrative, a source based analysis. And he gave me a copy of it to review. I haven't read the whole thing. However, it is an excellent resource. It goes through numerous Muslim apologetics arguments. It then provides refutations of those, and then it goes another step. It takes their counter arguments and he then provides counter arguments to those. So there's this regressive analysis of the arguments, and he provides you all the tools and resources, all of the references, everything you would need to dive deeper or to refute typical Muslim arguments. So, yeah, Dr. Kufar Frobo, welcome. Please
Oh, thank you
introduce
for
yourself.
having me. Thank you for having me. And basically, what I've been trying to do is use the capabilities of AI, right? And since I do polemics, meaning I debate Muslims, or I try to debate Muslims when I can find them, on making Muslims prove their claims, right? There's only one Quran. Okay, can you prove it? The Quran is perfect. It's the words of Allah. Can you prove it? So I put the Muslims on the defense, and I operate a little bit like CP because CP has a law background. I was going to be a lawyer, but I decided not to. So I like to operate like we're two lawyers and we're in a courtroom, right? I, of course, am on the opposite side. The Muslim's job as a lawyer, Allah hired the Muslim as a lawyer, and their job is to defend the Quran or whatever claims that they make. My job
Right.
as the prosecutor is to counter those. So if a Muslim tells me that there's a miracle in the Quran, okay, great. I do not accept. Well, it's in the Quran. Great, it's a book like any other book, but can we prove it? If you're making a historical claim, do we have? I like to call it the receipts. Do we have any historical documents? If it's scientific, does science actually agree with the science that's supposedly in the Quran? So I'm looking at it from a legal standpoint in a courtroom setting. There's things that are allowed and not allowed.
Right.
And then what I've been doing is I've been using chat. I've been reading a lot on the actual origins of Islam. Now, many of your audience are probably familiar, thanks to Dr. J. Smith, the sin or the standard Islamic narrative, right? Whereas where we get all the information about Islam, and also the Muslims get all the information about Islam. But is it true? Because everything that we know about Islam comes hundreds of years later by people who didn't know any of the people within the first three generations of so-called Islam. And how can we trust these sources? And what's even worse is that a lot of these sources that are attributed to, let's say, for instance, Sahih Bukhari. Well, we know he's from the 9th century and he has his collection, the Sahih Bukhari collection. So I've been using chat as like we're two lawyers, and I've actually been debating or arguing with chat. So, like for instance, Sahih Bukhari, the earliest copy or the earliest extant that we have of Sahih Bukhari, you'd be surprised. It's from the 15th, 16th century. How do we even know that this is from Sahih Bukhari? It's attributed to him
Because it's
or
in the name,
redacted,
it's Sahih.
you know. So we don't know. So what I've done on this book is, I spent a couple of weeks with chat, having chats back and forth, and based on the two books that I've been reading, The Hidden Origins of Islam and Early Islam, I said, let me have an
Right.
argument with chat. I want to know what actual evidence that we have from the 7th and 8th century. Definitely the 7th, because in the 7th, we're told that's when Muhammad becomes a prophet in 610, from the cave. He passes away in 632. So by 632, Islam was established, because even the Quran says in chapter 5, today I have perfected your religion, Islam. And so Islam is established. The Quran is established. This term called Muslim is established. So, and we know that in the middle 600s, these people that we now call Muslims today started invading pretty much all the known world: the Byzantine Empire, the Persian Empire, North Africa. It went to Europe. So what these scholars have been doing is they've been looking. They put aside the standard Islamic narrative. We know what the Muslims tell us. What does history tell us? You look at people like John of Damascus, who for 3 generations, his father, his grandfather, and himself worked for the Umayyads. Right now, we're told the Umayyads is, it's a Muslim empire. Is that true? So what these scholars have done is they said, okay, wait a minute. We're going to go back to the 7th century and early 8th century. We're going to try to find as much documentation from people writing in those areas. And are they going to tell us that in the 7th and early 8th century, was there indeed a religion called Islam? Was there a book called the Quran? Were there people or a group of people called Muslims? And was there a prophet named Muhammad? And we don't have anything that's really conclusive or definitive that actually would support all of that. So this is what I've done to help people deal with the Muslim arguments. If you want to get into, and as a matter of fact, Dr. Jay Smith said when I downloaded his 86th slideshow, his PowerPoint, he wants us to put the Muslims on the defense. See, the Muslims have always had the Christians on the defense. They love to challenge the Christians on the reliability of the New Testament or the Bible and so forth. Can we prove it? Is the Bible the words of God? Now it's our time to turn around the table and say, great, how about you prove your claims? So we have to stop being on the defense and we have to put them on the defense and we have to be on the offense. And this is a source that I put together. And like Lloyd said, I asked to give me X amount of arguments, but I didn't stop there. I said, okay, how would my opponent, what would be his arguments to counter those arguments? But then again, I didn't stop there. I said, great. So I have my arguments. I know what the Muslim could counter with, but give me counter arguments to their arguments and provide me the sources, because you want to have sources. You just don't want to be talking like Muslims do. Oh, trust me, bro. No, I need to see something. So it gives you the name of the book, the author, and the page. So this is basically what it is.
Okay, great. I just want to say hello, everyone. Of course, Little Omain, welcome. Thank you for being here. Basilget and Son of John, I saw your messages. Thank you very much. Yeah, so welcome, everyone. And hopefully you're excited about this as well, because tell me, is your book available, Dr. K? Is it, will it be made?
I actually have it on my YouTube as a buy me a coffee.
All right.
So what I'm doing is I'm putting, it's like $2, $3. So I'm putting together, like I'm going to be uploading the one that I just did today. It's 24 pages, strictly dealing with the so-called chain of narration or the isnads. Like, can we trust these hadiths that are hundreds of years later? Some even 500-600 years after the fact. Can we trust them? Are they reliable? So what I've done with this one, it's 24 pages, but that's just on one topic. And I asked to give me 50 arguments, give me 50 counter arguments, and then give me 50 refutations of those arguments and provide me the sources and give me a little cliff note version of, okay, what does this book deal with? So it's not just the book name and the page. It's also what is what's the narrative or what's the purpose of this book? So that came out to be 24 pages. So I'm doing that with a lot of stuff.
Okay, that's cool. You mentioned something in the beginning, and when I was reading through your book, there were a few things that stood out to me. And for instance, you mentioned, are there evidence from historical sources? Is there evidence from historical sources of the existence of Islam, of a religion called Islam, of a Muhammad, of a book called the Quran, which can be traced through solid, written evidence and so on to that period? And for instance, I just want to bring up here something that may be interesting to the audience. For instance, this is this is something I've been preparing that I want to talk about in the future. Um, John of Damascus. So this is Saint John of Damascus. So he's a very famous Christian theologian and also the last of the early church fathers, and he wrote about Islamic scriptures, right? So he worked in the Umayyad um, emperor's court, basically, as a chief financial officer, right, under numerous caliphs. And he wrote the heresy of the Ishmaelites, and he discussed the holy writings of what he called the Ishmaelites. I don't think he called them Muslims. And he
No.
said they have many books, they have
Mhm.
many writings. He didn't say they have a Quran, they said they have books. And then, of course, he tells a lengthy story about a thing known as the she camel, which is not found in the Quran today. It is hinted at, and the narrative exists outside of the Quran. But for instance, he identified the holy writings of the Arabs as the cow, the women, and the table, which are quote unquote Medinan surahs. And these are surahs 2, 4, and 5 of the Quran. And this is all that he referenced. Now, it's very odd that a man who was intimately involved with the caliphs, with the empire, who spoke the language, who interacted with these people on a daily basis for his entire life almost, didn't know about the Quran, didn't know the word Muslims and Islam. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a good point, because if the standard Islamic narrative is correct, we have a guy named Muhammad who was born in 570 AD. 610, he gets this thing in the cave, whether you believe it or not. So from 610 to 632, he's a prophet. He's getting revelation. He lives the majority of his time from 610 to 622 in Mecca. 622, he does a hijrah, or goes to Medina. That's where he amasses this supposedly large uh, army of followers. Comes back to Mecca, conquers Mecca without any bloodshed. Passes away in 632, which is hilarious because I found 3 hadiths in Sahih Muslim that say he died at 60, he died at 63, and he died at 65. This dismisses the whole, chain of narration, authenticity, because which one, ladies and gentlemen, did he die at 60, 63, or 65? We don't
It
know.
affects the chronology. That actually seriously affects the chronology, which affects the
Yeah.
history because the timing is off, which means certain events are wrong. Which and Muslims insist that their chronology, their timing is accurate, but yet this would tell us there's numerous issues. For instance, there's massive dispute within the Muslim community that, at least amongst the scholars, that most Muslims will not discuss with the age of Khadija. And the scholars will tell you she was 25, maybe 28, but there's no way she was 40, because how can you have 6 children at the age of 40 in the desert in the 7th century? So they said no, she had to be under 30. But then that changes the entire chronology, the story, and this means that much of what Islam says is in doubt because there's a knock-on effect.
All right. So let me see. The Arabic back then. Yeah, and you are right. It was only, well, I don't know, because John is from the 8th century, right? Now, if we're talking about the 7th century, yes. And at the time of Muhammad, there was no such thing as Muhammad. You would only read, like, for instance, if you look at the coin, I don't know if it's Muawi the first, or if it's the other guy, but it has the early MHMD, which is Mahmed, right? Now
Right.
that according to Mel from Speaker's Corner, in one of the series that he did with Dr. J. Smith, he's traced it all the way back to 1400 BC with the Ugarites, and it's always been a title: the chosen one, the praised one. Saint Ambrose used that title for Jesus. The XLRs, the Jewish XLRs, also called themselves, Mahmed. I mean, it's in the Old Testament in 12 verses. And one of the famous ones that Muslims like to use is, of course, Solomon 5:16, Mahmedim. And they'll say, oh, look, it's Muhammad. It doesn't even sound like Muhammad. And you can't even write Muhammad in Hebrew. That was one of the
I'm just
arguments.
bringing it up. This is Muhammad here,
Yeah,
MHMD, and notice it's with Christian crosses.
right.
So, and these are Muslim coins, these are Arab coins.
Yeah.
So the Islamic narrative is cast into doubt because you've got supposedly Muslim coinage, yet with crosses on them, referring to Muhammad. And we know from the 5th century already that Muhammad referred to God, to the Christian God Yahweh, and sometimes to Jesus.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I just want to say welcome to Jake Coleman Kane. Welcome. Thank you for your comment and for being here on the live. And I will be live with him. He's an author, and I will be live with him in a week. So I'll be making a couple of tweets about that with links to his books. So yeah, looking forward to that. Yeah, please go on.
no, I was going to say the other problem, and now one of the excuses that Muslims have come up with is that, oh, the reason that we find the early Umayyad coins, having crosses, it's not only just the crosses, because if you look at them, there's also a hint of Zoroastrianism. Because if you look at the coins, if you look at the 4 quadrants, I at first thought it was a crescent moon and a star, but what it is, it's a bowl with fire in it. And then on the back of one of these coins, there's a fire altar. That is from the Zoroastrians, right? But their excuse is, well, the Umayyads were only doing this because, there was Christians there. These guys must have been really bad Muslims, because first of all, you cannot have pictures. Images are haram. They're forbidden. And let alone having pictures with crosses. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's one. So let alone having pictures of crosses with crosses. And if you notice on the coins, look at the 4 quadrants. What do you see there? I thought at first it was a crescent moon. It's actually a bowl with fire. That's from the Zoroastrians. And there's the fire altar. So when you look at the early coins, I think from Muwawi, I think it's Muwawi the first. He's using the same coin that the Emperor Justine from the Byzantine Empire uses. Now, I had a back and forth with Chad. There's no conclusive evidence, but apparently there is some evidence that the Umayyads used to pay tribute to the Romans. So they basically used the same coins, right? They minted the same coins. And then as you go to Abdul Malik, who's like the 5th Umayyad caliph, he's the one with the Dome of the Rock. He made a mockery of the Byzantine ruler, and he minted his coins the same as Justine, but he got rid of the crosses. This caused a war between Justine and Abdul Malik, and of course Abdul Malik won. So it's after Abdul Malik that you start seeing the anti-Trinitarian. These early scholars, these early German scholars, they believed that people like Muwawi were actually Trinitarians, and that Abdul Malik was a Unitarian. And then after Abdul Malik is when you really start seeing the shift. So what scholars are saying is that based on the evidence that we have, Islam and the Quran and Muhammad were an evolution, were a historical development, meaning the Quran did not come down to a guy named Muhammad between 610 and 623. It was evolved. If you look at all the manuscripts that we have from the Quran or the Mushafs, you can see, especially Dan Brubaker did a excellent book on that. You can see these people are correcting the manuscripts to match what we read today called the 1924 Hufs. So everything that we've been told, everything that Muslims have been told. So basically, both of us have been lied. The non-Muslims have been lied, and the Muslims have been lied. Islam was not started by a guy named Muhammad. It did not start in Mecca and Medina, but it started in what was called Arabia Petraea. Now, I'm pretty sure most Muslims don't even know that there was 3 Arabias. You had Arabia Petraea, which would include Palestine, Israel, Jordan, Syria. You had Arabia Deserta, which is basically most of, if not all of Saudi Arabia. And then you had Arabia Felix, which today you have Yemen and Oman.
And you also had Arabia Heresium Ferax, which was Arabia, the mother of heresies, or Arabia, the bearer of heresies, which was southern Arabia, close to the Yemeni border, which was one of the major sources of, shall we say, Gnostic and pseudo-Christian, pseudo-biblical heresy that sprung up. and spread. So, which was one of the main sources, Haran being one, Turkey-Syria border, Najran the other, and Alexandria in Egypt the third.
Yeah.
So, on the point that you raised about the Arianism, so John of Damascus is 675 to 750. That's when he lived. So it's not that late, right? So that's not that late. I mean, it's before things like Bukhari. And he says that Muslims mutilate God by denying the divinity of Christ. Now, notice though, he does state that one of his criticisms is he says Islam is a heresy akin to Arianism, which denied the divinity of Christ. So there's that aspect of it. That he speaks of Arianism, which would then align, I think, to some degree with what you've said, correct?
Yeah. Now, I will disagree because John never really mentions Islam. This is like a later, interpretation because, especially when some of these documents that we have from the early periods, we don't actually have the originals. So we have copies written in a tribute to him. And by that time, Islam would have been established. I don't believe, and I've had a good conversation with Chad, explicitly by name, no. John never mentions a religion called Islam. He never
mentions the Ishmaelites.
Yeah, he mentions it, the Ishmaelites. All his heresies are against Christian heretics, right? And you're right. You brought up, he does mention that these rulers, and I think he does mention Muhammad. But then again, is it Muhammad or is it Mahmed? And who is this Muhammad? We don't know. But he does mention that these people, they follow or they have 4 books. And you brought them up: the cow, the woman, the table, and the camel. Now, we don't have anything in the Quran called the Surah of the Camel. We have a little discussion about, Allah sending down the she-camel as a sign, and, people pretty much, they put it aside. But so, and the dates that you brought up for John, that means that, let's say, John would have been at, 100 years, right? If Muhammad passed away at 632, and let's say John was writing in the early 700s, that would have been about at least 100 years after Islam should have been established. The Quran should have been formulated, because after all, Muhammad got all of the revelation in 23 years. But yet it's very weird that he never mentions that these people have a religion called Islam. He never calls these people Muslim, and he never mentions it in the Quran. Now, we're talking 100 years. He worked for the Umayyads.
Yeah, but if he was born 675, technically that's like 42 years after Muhammad died, more or less.
Right, but you're talking when he was born, so he wouldn't have started writing anything probably until 30 or something years later. Right, so he would have been, I'm not quite sure when he wrote those things, but one of my sources said like around 730. So we're still talking about 100 years. I'm pretty sure he didn't start writing when he was 10 or 15 or 20. He might have, I don't know, but still, he did live in the middle 8th century. By that time, all of this should have been solidified. We should have had people, proclaiming this religion called Islam. We should have had oh man, these people have a book called the Quran, and these people call themselves, Muslims. We don't see that. They're called Saracens, Hagarites, Ishmaelites, Muhaddarites. Nothing to do or indicate that they're Muslims, that they have a religion called Islam, or any of that stuff. And that's why the scholars say, when they look at the evidence, it looks like Islam as a separate religion didn't take hold until the end of the 8th and 9th century. And who was ruling? Who was ruling during that time? The Abbasids, and they did not like the Umayyads.
Right. I just want to make a last point related to John of Damascus, and we can go into the book, and you can continue with. But there was a Muslim who came in earlier, and when I spoke of the story that John of Damascus tells about the camel, and how that story is not in the Quran, and the guy said, "Well, the story of the camel is in the Quran." I'm sorry, Mr. Muslim, that's a different story, completely different story. Now, John of Damascus writes about a chapter called "The Camel of God," where he describes a camel that drank an entire river and subsequently could not pass between two mountains due to its size. So he describes this fictional narrative involving the camel's offspring being taken to Parasite, and becoming drunk on wine. Now, this is what John of Damascus writes about. There's a vague reference to this within Islamic sources, but the story in the Quran is a completely different story. Now you've got this historical writing, and of course, Muslims are going to claim whatever they're going to claim about this, but this no longer exists, which is very interesting. So that's just the point I want to raise, just to answer this Muslim who made these comments in the chat earlier. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it was abrogated or maybe degodated. See, that's the thing. Islam falls apart when you actually look at the sources. If you want, and this goes with anything, if you want to find out about a particular, person or event, you have to go to that particular time. So you have to look at the 7th and 8th century. Because again, these people, whoever, let's just call them Ishmaelites or Arabs, these people went on a invasion frenzy. They started attacking everybody. So you have all these people writing about these individuals, these groups of people. And I just find it strange that nobody knows anything about Islam, a Quran, Muslims, a prophet, right? There's nothing that indicates. So what Muslims have to do with the standard Islamic narrative, it's all based on assumptions. Oh, they knew, yeah, we know it's about Prophet Muhammad. Well, if you and I are in the courtroom, you telling me that if your argument is, oh, we know it's talking about Prophet Muhammad. Okay, great. But how would you prove it? It could be anybody. That's not going to fly with me. You can't just tell me, well, we know. No, you don't know because you don't have any evidence for it. I mean, none of this stuff would fly if it was used against the criticism of Christianity and in the Bible. And this is what's been done to the Bible for over 200 years. Now we're like, we're going to turn the other cheek, and we're going to apply the same historical critical analysis that was done to the Bible and Christianity, and now the scholars are doing it to Islam and the Quran. And so far, it's failing.
Yeah, agreed. So about your book, these are the chapters in your book. Do you want to walk us through these and tell us what the book's about so that everyone can know what it is they're going to learn and gain from this? And then maybe you can give us some examples. We can go step by step through some of these chapters, but tell us about this.
Yeah, so basically this was a project of mine. I have been having court debates or battles with chat for about I'd say about a month now. Some of them last 4, 5, 6 hours, right? So I've been arguing because I've been studying the origins of Islam, meaning where did Islam originate from, right? What part of the, as far as geographical, and looking at the evidence. So basically, I've been kind of like corroborating what the scholars have been finding. And I wanted to have a discussion with chat. So for this particular one, after having, hours and hours and hours of back and forth on different topics, I had chat, I talked to chat and I said, listen, I want to put this together in a book format. And actually, chat's the one that came up with the topic. So I basically told her, listen, so the name of the book is Challenging the Standard Islamic Narrative, right? And it's a source-based analysis. So I'm using the available sources that historians have access to, right? And it's debating the existence of early Islamic history in the 7th and 8th centuries. So what I did was I kind of broke it down into basically 7 chapters, right? So I wanted to look at, let's look at the 7th, 8th century sources. And when I did that, I wanted not only look at the sources, I also wanted to look at what could a Muslim come back at me. And then I said, well, that's not enough, because if he comes back with this, then what do I do? So I said, okay, now I need to counter their arguments but I also wanted it to be source based. So anybody who reads this, you have the sources. There's no, this is not my original work. Well, I mean, outside of my, I just put it into a format because if I would have done it in the other format, it would just be me and Chad going back and forth, right? So these were the topics. Chapter 1, we go over the 7th and 8th century sources and refutations for the sources. You know, Muslims, because Islam is based on three things, as Dr. J. Smith said. You have the man, you have the book, and you have the place. It's a three-legged stool. If you can knock out any of the legs, then Islam falls apart. So looking at the 7th and 8th century sources, looking at the life of Muhammad, do we really have anything to support a guy named Muhammad that was born in Mecca, right? So it's the life of Muhammad, a historical gap. Then, of course, Mecca. If Mecca doesn't exist, then Muslims have a problem. Where did this Muhammad come from, right? There could have been a Muhammad, but he didn't come from Mecca. Then the other thing is the Quran, right? It's supposed to be perfect. It's not supposed to have any errors at all, right? And then the reliability of the isnads, that deals more with the hadiths. Can we trust the hadiths? And then the other one was
Technically, the verses of the Quran are also dependent on a chain of narration, and the idea of tawatur, or highly reliable, irrefutable transmission, is a very late invention. It's something like the 14th or 15th centuries that
right.
became in conception. Prior to that, the verses of the Quran were not considered to be irrefutably, reliably transmitted. Those are also late inventions. And so the Quran is actually dependent on this, because look, Muhammad had multiple scribes who wrote down these verses. Which scribe wrote which verse or which chapter, we don't know. Who wrote it down? Who passed it? We have no records of that. So there's a lot of vagary there too.
Now, one of the problems with that is, I'm pretty sure most people know, the Quran is not in revelation order. So it's not set in the order that supposedly Muhammad received it. We do not have any sources outside of the chapters where they were revealed. We really don't have a timeline because not all the verses came down for one chapter, at the same time. So we don't have any sources that say, hey, this chapter came down in 624. This chapter came down in 627. We don't know. I have not been able to find a source for it, but we do know the chronological order. Now, I found it amazing that by putting the Quran in chronological order, okay, besides the fact that Muhammad, by the name Muhammad, is only mentioned 4 times, and then there's one time, I think in chapter 66, he's mentioned as Ahmed. But the first mention of this prophet, this man, this perfect man, this is Islam, is not until the end of the book, chapter 89, which would show that the historians are correct. Muhammad, as an Arabian prophet, is a later fabrication or addition. Because how come 88 chapters prior to the first time Muhammad is mentioned, which I think is in chapter 3, how come we never heard of this guy? I mean, don't you think that's kind of weird?
And well, Jesus is mentioned almost 90 times. And in fact, if Muhammad is a title, then there may potentially be references to Jesus as well, if they're not a proper name and a title. And then, of course, the only woman I think that's mentioned by name in the Quran is Mary, Jesus' mother.
Yeah,
so it's very odd.
That has a problem. Now, Mel from Speaker's Corner, in his research, he believes that out of the 4 verses that mention Muhammad, he believes that 3 of them are actually a title that refer to Jesus. He only believes the last verse that mentions Muhammad is actually a person, this Arabian prophet. The first 3, he believes it's just, Mahmed, which means the chosen one, the praised one, which was a title given to Jesus. So when we look at this, and again, when we look at the sources, the hadiths are hundreds of years later, and that's even problematic because the authors of these collections are hundreds of years later. But the actual copies that we have are even much later than when these people lived. You know, like I think I had mentioned Bukhari, and this was according to Jay Smith, and I confirmed it with Chad. The earliest collection that we have of Bukhari is from the 15th, 16th century. Well, Bukhari lived in the latter part of the 9th century. What happened to his collection? Now, I know a lot of this stuff is based on oral tradition, which Shoemaker has a really good chapter on that. I also have, I'm putting together some sources on the, let's just say, the unreliability of oral transmission, aka, you know, memorizing stuff, and you had brought some up. But I did touch on the isnads. But like I said, now I'm just coming out with a, I guess you could call it a booklet. I have 24 pages, basically destroying the whole reliability of isnads. You know, scholars say the isnads is something that was invented much later, right? And it was influenced by whoever was the political leader of that time. So there's a lot of problems. Me personally, I believe within the next 5 to 10 years, if we keep doing what we're doing, and I don't, excuse me, I don't mean myself, but the scholars and historians, man, I'm losing my voice. I don't think Muslims are going to have a leg to stand on. If you stay a Muslim, that's because you refuse to look at the evidence. And we can't help you there.
Right.
So I guess we can jump into, let's say, chapter 1. And they can kind of take a look at, see how I kind of put it together.
Actually, let me just change the viewing.
Okay.
We'll display. So do it like that, a little easier to read.
Okay. Now, I was going to say, if you want to, you could share my screen because I have it up.
Oh, sorry, your screen. Yeah, let me do that. Sorry, yeah.
Yes.
There you are.
So I'm going to be reading off of it. And let me see. Do I need to make it any bigger? I've got it at 200. Let me see if I can do. I think 200 is the most I can do on this. 250. Yeah, 200. All right. So for instance, the first chapter is chapter 1: lack of 7th and 8th century sources for the standard Islamic narrative. So basically, I had asked Chad, okay, I'm having a debate, right? It's going to be in a courtroom setting. So we're two lawyers, and I am debating the fact that there's no primary sources confirming the existence of Muhammad, Islam, or the Quran in the 7th century. Can you give me 15 arguments? So as you see, Chat listed the 15 arguments. And the first one was the absence of 7th century manuscripts, right? So Chat says there are no fully surviving Quranic manuscripts from the 7th century. They only have fragments, and they're heavily debated, meaning like the Sana, we really don't have any really actual dating. Another argument was there's non-Islamic historical silence, which is kind of weird because we're talking about the Byzantine and the Persians. You got the Roman Empire, you got the Persian Empire. These people lived around the area. We don't have any sources from the 7th century, right? And the sources that we have, they don't mention Muhammad. They don't mention Islam until decades after Muhammad supposedly died. Right now, guys, this is not some Joe Snow off of the street. This is one of the most influential figures to Muslims. He is the perfect man. And yet we don't have hardly anything about this man. Everything that we know about this man was written by Muslims 200 to 300 years after the fact. Everybody that possibly knew this guy was dead. Anybody that knew the people that knew this guy was dead. Anybody that knew the people that knew the people that knew Muhammad were dead. You're talking people that had been dead for decades, if not centuries.
Right.
Then we have...
Actually, on this point, if I can just show something here.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, if we look at... Oops. Let me just cancel that. If we look here, we were looking at these sources for, you mentioned for the hadiths. I mean, you've got these people. Notice Uzbekistan, Iran, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan. Why not Mecca, Medina, Mecca, Medina, Mecca? Why Turkmenistan of all places?
Well,
You know,
my
I mean,
my thinking is that all these people came from the Arabia Petraea and other areas, meaning Islam did not start
yeah.
uh,
And
and where we're told.
yeah, Mecca's around here, and Mecca's
Hmm.
approximately here.
Yeah.
And then you've got all of these places from Iraq all the way across up to here. It's insane. You'd think that, that the Meccan Quran came from Mecca or something like that, but it's very much out of place geographically and out
Well,
of time
why?
as well.
Why? Because if you look at, for instance, the Umayyads, where did these people rule from? Damascus. Where's Damascus? Up in Syria. How come they didn't rule from Mecca and Medina? Mecca is supposed to be the holiest of holiest city for Muslims, and Medina would be like the political capital, and Mecca would be the holy city, right? Kind of like Petra was the holy city in that particular area. And then if you look at even the early Abbasids, where did they rule from? They actually built the city of Baghdad. That's where they ruled from. Why aren't these people ruling from Mecca and Medina? Could it be that there was really nothing of significance in that area and it wasn't until much later? I mean, it makes no sense. Again, like I said, when you look at history, the story of Islam that we're told makes absolutely no sense. You got people writing about it that didn't even live in the area. None of these people were Arabs or Arabic speakers. They were mostly Persians and so forth. So again, so we have lack of anything, lack of inscriptions. Man, we got tons of inscriptions. Professor Ahmed Jalalad, whose expertise is inscriptions, he's looked at thousands and thousands of inscriptions, and his conclusion is that by the 6th century, nobody was worshiping pagan gods in that area, right? They were practicing, everything points to monotheism. Now, which god we don't know. He doesn't know. But that goes against the standard narrative of Islam because Muhammad's tribe, the Quraysh, they were pagans. These people were pagans. There were pagans in the area. Well, how can you have pagans when you have a professor, you have a scholar that says, hey, we can't find any signs of pagan worshiping by the time we hit 6th century. We find them in the 5th, we find them in the 4th, we find them in the 3rd, but we don't find anything in the 6th century. And again, Muhammad is
Mhm.
from the 7th century. So that's a problem. Then we have the problem with early Muslim coins, from the so-called Umayyad period. We got coins with crosses. Now, we do have coins with the title Muhammad, which is added later. But again, in that time period, you would not find Muhammad. You would just find MHMD, Mahmed, the chosen one, the praised one. That could be applied to anybody. It's a title that was given to Jesus. Even Saint Ambrose, I think he was from the 3rd century or 4th century, he applied that title to Jesus. We have absence of Christian chronicles. Again, we don't have any contemporary. And when we talk about contemporary, we're talking about texts, documents from the time period that this guy lived, that Islam was created. So contemporary Christian texts, such as those from the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines, they don't mention Islam. They don't mention Muhammad. Again, John of Damascus, 8th century, never mentions Islam or the Quran. I do believe he mentions Muhammad. We have these people, these Arabs. They started conquering these lands like it was going out of style. So we have all these conquests by these people, but there's no mention that these people belong to a religion called Islam, that they followed a religion called Islam, and these people are not called Muslims. All right. Then we also have a problem. There's gaps in Mecca's archaeological record. Patricia Crone did a good book, The Make and Trade Route. She actually tried to find Mecca, and she basically refuted Montgomery Ward's theory that Mecca was was in the middle of a major trade route, and she proved that
Hmm.
that's not true. So we have problems with Mecca, meaning with all the excavations that's been taking place in Mecca. I mean, Mecca looks like a concrete jungle now. I mean, you got these massive skyscrapers, meaning they would have to dig very deep for the foundations. Nobody finds anything. You dig anywhere near Israel, bingo, you're going to find something. Nothing that shows that if Mecca was the mother of all cities and has existed from the time of Adam, which is what Muslims tell us, Abraham
Hmm.
and Ishmael rebuilt the house of God that they claim is the Kaaba. We don't have any evidence.
I mean, they claim it is the oldest city
Yes,
created on Earth.
yes.
They claim
Uh,
that the Kaaba is the oldest temple on Earth, which means we should have evidence dating back to that period when we have nothing. I will show the audience this. I mean, this was found in Yemen, and it's a Christian figure, right, made in the era of the Prophet Muhammad. So this is this 530 A.D. So there was Christianity in that area, well
right.
established.
Yeah. So
And
yeah,
in fact,
I
more
just
and more buried churches are coming to light in Arabia.
yeah.
Churches from the third and fourth and fifth centuries that were destroyed and buried down to their foundations and then buried. So there's more and more evidence of Christianity coming to light.
Yeah. Now, according to, like I said, according to Shoemaker's latest book, he says there's no evidence for Christians and Jews living in Mecca and in Medina. But Yemen, yes. The Arabia Petra, yes. There were lots of Christians, lots of Jews, definitely lots of heretical Christians because they had been run off by the Byzantine Empire, which were Trinitarians, and most of these were, the Jacobites, the Ebionites. These people were not Trinitarians. So, in order to avoid the consequences, they all migrated to those areas. But to Mecca and Medina, no, there was no reason for them to be there. So we have all of that. Um, all right. So we have absence of Quranic codices in the 7th century. That just basically means manuscripts, right? So the earliest known Quranic manuscripts appear in the 8th century, not in the time of Muhammad. But what do Muslims claim? Oh, we have the original Quran. Okay, great. Show me. They cannot even produce a Quran from the time of Uthman, who supposedly had 6 copies sent to different areas: Mecca, Medina, Basra, Kufa. Uh, we can't find a single one of them. None of these locations have ever come out of Muslim uh, control, right? They've been Muslim since the beginning. Nobody has ever conquered them. So there's no reason to not have at least one copy. One copy is all we ask. Non-existence early mosque structures. It says here the earliest mosques do not appear to have Islamic iconography or the directions towards Mecca. Again, this
Right.
suggests a later Islamic influence, which leads credence to Islam as a religion did not exist. What's his name? Dan Gibson has an awesome book, Quranic Geography, where he basically says, based on his research with satellite and so forth, that for at least 100 years, none of these mosques pointed to Mecca. Kind of strange because I believe in the Quran, and I think it's 624. Supposedly, the Qiblas or the direction of prayer was changed from, they say Jerusalem, but the Quran never mentions Jerusalem one time. But it was changed from X to Y to Mecca. But we don't have any evidence of that. By the 7th century, the 5 pillars of Islam should have already been established, definitely by the early 8th century. We don't have any 7th century references to the 5 pillars of Islam, right? There's no records of the key practices of Islam. Those, again, they appear much later in Islamic history. This is going to be the theme, ladies and gentlemen. Everything is going to be much later, not in the 7th century, not in the 8th century. Now, when we go into the Sira, or the earliest biographies of Muhammad, for such an important guy, the earliest biography is said to be by Ibn Ishaq. We don't have anything. We
Yeah.
have supposedly Ibn Hisham, which is 833. I'm not even sure what's the earliest copy on that one. I don't
And
think
Ibn
I have.
Hisham is a redaction of 4 other copyists, of which we don't
Yes.
have those copies
Yeah.
either.
So again, we don't have. Okay, so we have something that's said to have been from Ibn Ishaq. Now, I don't agree with Dr. J when he says that the Sirat Rasul Allah or the Ibn Hisham was written by a German guy in 1858. I don't see any credible evidence of this. I mean, it could be, I don't know, but
I think he mentions, I mean, these are collections of different writings that were assembled, and
yes,
then of the different narratives, they selected what seemed to make coherent sense and assembled those into a compendium. And that because there are numerous different versions of the Sirah. I mean, there are some incredibly, shall we say, fanciful
yes,
storytellings about Muhammad in the Sirah. So someone took what seems to be, I mean, more than one effort was made to take what seemed to be coherent historical, quote unquote narratives and to assemble them into a Sira. I mean, Guillaume did it, and then of course others. So yeah, but these are selections from amongst multiple contradictory stories.
yeah. But the thing is, what Jay Smith is saying is that the first collection of the Sira was done by this guy, this German guy, in 1858, which he basically went to museums and libraries and collected anything that he could find about Muhammad, and he compiled it into the Sirat Rasul Allah, which was then translated by Guillaume. I'm butchering the names, but
Guillaume.
I'm not very convinced of that. But if that's true, that's even more damning to Muslims, because then that means the earliest biography of Muhammad is 160 years old. I mean, that's problematic. It's bad enough that the Quran just turned 100 years
Well,
this
yeah,
year,
the
1924.
Quran is technically canonical
Yeah.
only for 100 years since 24.
Well,
Yeah,
and that depends. That's if you take the 1924, which was canonized for Cairo, and then in
true.
1935, 36, it was canonized for all of Egypt. And then, like around 1985, the King of Saudi Arabia liked it so much that he canonized it, or he made it the official Quran for all Muslims. So it depends on which one you start. 1924, 1935, or 1985. But it's
Right.
it's no it's no more than 100 years, which is it's kind of problematic. Okay. We don't have any
Right.
non-Muslim sources mentioning the Quran in the 7th century. We brought up John of Damascus, who's from the 8th century. We know now this is probably your specialty in the Islamic jurisprudence, the Sharia. The Sharia seems to be a later evolution, right? So the Islamic legal texts, such as the Hadith and collections, were not compiled until the 9th century. And I would say even that's problematic because do we actually have any collections from the 9th century? I don't think we do. 14, the uncertainty of pre-Islamic Arabian historical records. I mean, we lack any form of corroboration in pre-Islamic Arab history. It's almost like it didn't exist. It just popped out of nowhere. There's nothing about a history of a unified political or religious movement under Muhammad, which should have happened by 632. All of this should have been solidified at the time of Muhammad's passing away, meaning Islam was already established. I mean, even the Quran says, "Today I have perfected your religion, Islam." So it was perfected. Now, I guess prior to that, they were practicing an imperfected religion. I don't know. The Quran was already revealed. Now, it may not have been in a book form, but it was
Mhm.
all revealed. And yet we don't have anything to that. And then finally, we have Sabaeus, who supposedly is from the 660s, doesn't mention a Quran. And Sabaeus was an Armenian bishop, talks about the Arabs in 660s, not very long from the time of Muhammad. We're talking, 632. We're talking about 28 years, right?
Right.
So then I asked chat, give me some counter arguments, right? So it says, so these would be some of the arguments that a Muslim might use. Let's say, you bring up Sabaeus, and they'll say, well, Sabaeus does not mention Islam explicitly. His writings about the Arab conquest and their prophet, has been interpreted. So Muslims interpret this. Well, you see, he's talking about the Arabs, right? I mean, who conquered all these lands? It had to be the Muslims? No, it doesn't have to be the Muslims. The Dome of the Rock, 691 by Abdul Malik, right? Some of the what do you call it? The early Islamic scholars, they'll say, you see, we have inscriptions with the word Mahmed. So those are references to Muhammad? No, those are references to Mahmed. Who is this Mahmed? It's Jesus. It's an anti-Trinitarian attack on the divinity of Jesus Christ. You got the Maronite Chronicles, and you can break in anytime you want, Lloyd. 660. Again, no,
Not the Maronite, the Maronite.
Oh, I'm sorry, the Maronite. 660, again, 28 years. Not a very long time span from the time of Muhammad. Now, this is wrong. It does not say the Arabs of Muhammad. It says that the Tayyeh of MHMT and the rapid expansion under the Arabs. Again, possibly indicating some recognition of Islam. And in a courtroom, we don't deal in possibilities or assumptions or opinions. It's what can you prove? We have the coins of Abdul Malik, late 7th century. He's the guy that's attributed to the Dome of the Rock, right? We see that he reformed the coinage in the late 7th century. He took out the crosses, but he still made a mistake. So he took out the crosses, right? His next coin has a picture of a ruler with a flaming sword, which is believed to be him, which again, that goes against Islam. These people were really bad Muslims. And it does have, Muhammad or Mahmed. And you notice it still has, what we would consider, or Muslims consider, pagan symbolism. Why is there Zoroastrian's symbols in those coins? Because these people were from that area. Zoroastrianism was practiced in the Arabian
which tells us Iran and places further east, which is the area of influence of the Zoroastrian religion. But also Muslims are lately starting to say, well, Zoroaster was obviously inspired by Allah and a messenger of Allah because, blah, blah, blah. It's like, because I've had Muslims tell me that in the chat, in the comments, because now they're suddenly embracing all of these figures because, well, what do they say? Right? I just find it really contradictory. And I mean, you're just on chapter 1 here, and you're giving an incredible listing of all of these issues, which I think is very helpful for people to refer to as a reference. And I mean, these can be turned into episodes of their own.
Right.
We can take a few of these and discuss. I just want to go to my own notes.
Yeah, sure.
For instance, let me just bring this up here for a sec. I mean, you said that the Quran has been, your religion has been perfected, all right? And it's supposedly based on the Quran, but it needs all of these copious hadiths, seerah, tafsir, etc., to be complete. Because, of course, the Quran doesn't teach you how to do the prayers that Muslims do in the mosque. The Quran doesn't even list the names of all Muhammad's wives. So are Muslims just making those up? Where are they getting that information? And for instance, there was supposed to be one single unchanged Quran, perfected and never altered, never edited, right? Perfectly remembered. So why do we have 7 readers selected in the 8th century? You've got Ibn Amr ad-Dimashqi, you've got all the way down to Al-Kisai, right? And these are decided by Ibn Mujahid, then comes along, right? So in 936.
Roughly 10th century.
Yeah, sorry, I could have my date wrong there. It could be 9th century, but yeah, then you've got, this could be a typo. Then, of course, you have, along with these qira'at, or these supposedly canonical versions of the Quran, these perfectly preserved canonical versions, you've got transmitters. So there are supposed to be 2 transmitters for each of the readers. So then you've got these transmitters selected by Al-Shatibi, right? So that's 1194. That's a few weeks after Muhammad died, I think. Probably 2, maybe 3 weeks.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. Give or take 400-500 years. It's within a week or 2 of Muhammad's death. Then you've got these transmitters selected by Al-Jazari. Okay, so there's an even longer list of these transmitters. Then you've got some more transmitters from the 1400s. how many Quran versions do we have? And then of course you've got so what you have is you've got supposedly the 7 Qira'at, which became the 10 Qira'at, which became the 14 Qira'at, and each Qira'at has 2 transmitters. And then, of course, you've got the Hafs Quran, which is not one of the Qira'at, it's one of the transmitters. And of course, Hafs has 4 different versions of his own Quran. So now you've got at least 42 different versions. If you take the 14 Qira'at plus 2 transmitters per, plus you've got Hafs, who's got 4 versions of his own. So now you've got 45 versions of the Quran. And I mean, this is just to start. So this makes no sense.
Now, notice when Hafs becomes picked. 12th century, right? So he wasn't part of the 7 original. I don't see Hafs in there, right? He wasn't part of the second.
Hafs
So
is
he
here.
comes in,
This is Hafs here.
right? He
He's
comes
okay.
in the 12th century, almost the 13th century, because you're talking 1194, right? So he wasn't even one of the the 7 originals, or actually the 10 originals, right? Because he's a
The
student,
14 originals. I mean,
right?
which is it?
He's a student of Asim. So that's why you have, and I have a really good book, and the only problem I have with it is that it doesn't have the Arabic of these different recitations, and it's called the Bridges Translations of the 10 Qirats.
Well, I was showing that yesterday.
Right. And it's great. But like I said, the one downfall is he only shows the Arabic of the Hafs, and he tells you, okay, this is what the Hafs says. And then you go down to the footnotes. Okay, you have it. You go down to the footnotes, and it will tell you such and such reading says such and such. Now, some of these are, Muslims just say, oh, it's pronunciation, it's an accent. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you look at the early Quran manuscripts, you can't have different pronunciations and accents without any dots and vowels. It would just be a skeleton, right? When the introduction of the dots, the introductions of the Dhamma, the Kasra, the Fatha, that's when you start getting the short and long vowels, and then you start that's all much later.
Let me show some examples taken from the Bridges translation of the Quran is the translation of the 10 Qira'at of the Noble Quran, not the 14, not the 7, of the 10.
Right.
All right. And he's got the Arabic. He compares the differences between these versions of the Quran, these variants of the Quran. So, for instance, in Surah 24, An-Nur, right, you've got, this is in the Bridges. You can get that in my Google archive. Check in the description, him or her. Now, different recitations in the Quran are conflicting. They are contradictory. For instance, may Allah's curse be upon him. And then other versions of the Quran say, may Allah's wrath be upon her. Now, there's a difference between curse and wrath and between him and her. So she is guilty versus he is guilty. That is a contradiction. Which is it? Now, depending on which Quran you're using, wherever in the world you are, in the one Quran, it's a female. In another Quran, it's male. In a court of law, if I accuse you of something versus I accuse some other woman of something, is that the equivalent thing, Dr. K?
No.
So these are contradictions in the Quran. Here's another one. For instance, Surah 13, Ar-Rad, the thunder, page 168 in the Bridges book, in this book here that we've just showed you, this Bridges translation of the 10 Qira'at. So, rather, the scheming of those who have denied has been adorned for them, and they were barred from the way. They were prevented from going. They were prevented from traveling.
Right.
However, right, in the Nafi version, in the Ibn Kathir, Abu Amr, Ibn Amir, and Abu Jafar versions, you have they barred others from, they stopped others.
Yeah.
Now, is it a contradiction? Are these opposites? I stopped them or they stopped me? Is there a contradiction there?
Well,
we stopped others, others stopped us.
I mean,
there is a contradiction there.
If you use your brain cells, right? If you use reason and critical thinking, one says people are stopping you from doing something, and the other one says you are stopping them. And this is the same thing. I think it's 3712, which God Logic has been using it for a while. It says, I wonder versus you wonder. Now, because it's Allah speaking, who is the one that wonders? Is Allah wonder? Is it Allah who wonders, or is it Muhammad who wonders? It makes a
Right.
difference. And how the Muslims try to, you know,
Do you want to show that to us? Do you have the reference available?
I just know it's in chapter 37:12. I would have to. Well, you have the bridges.
Yep.
You can kind of pull it up there and see what the bridges says. This was not from the bridges. This was from I think it was Rob Christian. He did a show on it.
Yeah. Yeah, but well, we've given some examples. I mean, there are
Yeah.
more that one could go to, but these are the issues. You can get the bridges, look at those for yourselves for the audience. Just get a copy and you'll see the Quran contradicts itself. There are no, these different versions of the Quran are not the same. They are altered, they are edited, they have different grammar, they have different words, completely different meanings. Him and her, we know there's a difference between men and women, even if some very confused people in California do not. But you know, so yeah.
I mean, like here's an example. Chapter 2, verse 119, and the bridges. It says in the Hafs, it says that Muhammad will not be asked about the people of purgatory. Now, when you go to the Nafi, it says, so do not ask about the people of purgatory. So we have one Quran that's telling Muhammad he's not going to be asked about the people of purgatory, versus another Quran that's basically telling Muhammad, don't ask about the people of purgatory. Well, I mean, that's a difference. Oh, and here's another one.
Yeah, here it is.
Yeah.
Let me just see if I can find this QA.
Probably towards the top.
Okay, for you will not be asked about the fellows of purgatory. For you will not be asked,
Yeah.
right? I am not going to ask you versus do not ask about.
Right. So we got
I
one.
won't ask you. Do
Yeah.
not ask me. Those are two completely separate issues.
Now stay there and go back up. Go back up to right after that where it says, okay, now go down a little bit more. It has to do with Abraham. Okay, go down a little bit more. Okay, you
Here
see
we
right
go.
there where it says and take. It says and no, not that one. It says and take from Abraham. Now we have a present tense, right? Hey, don't take from Abraham. Now, if you go to the footnote, and in the other Qurans, it's going to say what? It says, and they took. Well, that's in the past tense. So which one is it? So you have a lot of problems. Yeah, you have a lot of problems with. Okay, there's a verse that says, I think it's in chapter 19, has to do with Mary. So it mentions the books of Allah. But in another Quran, it says the book of Allah. Okay, so here you have a difference between a plural and a singular. That's a difference, right? Here you have present tense, past tense. All of these things matter. Addition of a word, a deletion of a word. Well, how do you claim perfect preservation? And we show you all of these. This is not your book. I didn't write that book. You didn't write that book. Fidel is definitely a Muslim because he starts opening about thanking his sheikh. I don't have a sheikh. You don't have a sheikh. So we're showing them, and this is not the only book dealing with the, with the problems with the Kirat. I think Shadi Nazar also probably deals with this in his two books.
Just want to bring this up. For instance, this is from a PDF that Jay Smith put out. This is about 6 years old now, but it's still relevant in many ways. Not his latest research. Yeah. For instance, there's only one Quran, unaltered, unedited, and untampered. Right? The Quran text is entirely reliable. It has not been altered, edited, or tampered with since it is revealed. There's only one Quran, perfectly preserved. Yet we know for a fact there's at least 42 of them. There's 4, yeah.
He knows this. You know this. I know this. So why is he lying? Did they think that we would not have access to these things? Like I said, Dan Brubaker, when he comes out with his complete research on the manuscripts, because the book that he put out only has, I think, 22 or 24 examples, which Jay Smith has been using it. He's got over 4,000 differences. And these are not, diacritical marks. These are consonantal differences. So how do you have all of these differences? How do you have but wait a minute. If Uthman destroyed all the other six kirats, or
Hmm.
whatever you want to call them, I don't know if they're kirats, the ahrufs, or whatever. But if he
Versions.
destroyed the other six, because I don't even think the Muslim scholars have a consensus in what this kirat and ahruf mean. I don't know. But if he supposedly standardized it in 2-1, why is it that we have these canonizations of these different teachers and students, in the 10th century, in the 12th century, in the 14th century? Because today we have like the Hafs, and you don't even need to go to all these other Qurans. Just between the Hafs and the Warsh, you can see the differences. And I'm sorry, this is not
Yes.
pronunciation. This is not tomato, potato, patata. These are different words based on the placement of the dots and based on the placements of the diacritical marks. I don't care how you slice it. And I know Muslims have tried to use, well, you don't know Arabic. You're right. I don't know Arabic. But one thing that I do know, you can give me two Arabic words or even a whole verse. I'm going to look at the diacritical marks on every single one of those words. I can point out, okay, that
Hmm.
word is not the same as that word.
I mean, we have enough evidence from Muslim scholars being
Yeah.
forced to make admissions that the Quran, there are different versions. You wouldn't have to canonize it in 1924, then again update it in 1925, then again make a new one in 1985 if it was perfectly preserved, if it wasn't changing and had to be brought back. And we know there were multiple different versions, and we can see this in the bridges, which is written by not a Mormon, not a Christian, but a Muslim.
I mean, the other problem is if we look at the early scholars, right? They don't even agree on how many verses were in the Quran.
Right.
The Medina scholars say the Quran had X amount, 6,000 and something. The Mecca says this. The Kufa says this. The Basran says this. It gets worse when we look at the Shiite sources like Usul al-Kafi, which I have his book. I mean, I probably have about 10,000 books by now, and you read that Muhammad was given 17,000 verses by Jibril. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened to about 11,000 verses?
You got to ask, and we know also that pre-canonization monks, there were some Qurans with 116 verses.
Oh, yeah, you had Ubay Kab, you have Ibn Masud, two of the people
Hmm.
that Muhammad supposedly in the Hadith says, if you want to learn or study the Quran, these are the four that you should study from. Now, when Abu Bakr supposedly compiled the Quran because people were, dying left and right in the Battle of Yamama, uh, what did he do? He had Zayd bin Thabit. Who is Zayd bin Thabit? Zayd bin Thabit was about he was born somewhere between 6'11", 6'13". So he was only 20, 21 years old when Muhammad passed away. You want me to believe that this was Muhammad's most expertise scribe? Are you kidding me? I mean, I don't know if it was Ibn Masud or Ubay Kab. He says, why should I trust this guy? He was breastfeeding during the time of, the prophet getting revelation. He did not agree with the Bukhari. Now, Shoemaker believes, and he's probably right because we don't have any evidence, that the whole story of Uthman, burning the other so-called, false recitations was a fabrication by Bukhari.
Hmm.
I mean, it could be.
Okay. All
Why?
right.
Because we don't even have a copy of a Quran that or a Musaf or a
No,
codicy that goes back to Uthman. There
no,
isn't one.
we don't have the original Mohammedan Quran. We don't have the original Uthmanic Quran.
No.
We don't at all have that. I also want to mention something that we discussed previously, if I can bring this up, because you mentioned Shoemaker. I just want to just discuss this with the audience because Muslims constantly and since the earliest times they've been talking about memorization. So in his book, Creating the Quran, actually let me first show the cover of that. Um, just bringing this up so I can show this to the audience. So this is Creating the Quran. a historical critical study by Stephen Shoemaker, and this
And
is
he gives it
available
away
for
for free.
free. Yeah, you can download this for free. So you can locate this online easily and get a free copy. He gives this away for free. Let me show you. So that's Creating the Quran, a historical critical study by Stephen Shoemaker. We close that. So he says that memorization cannot explain how the Quran was preserved. Human memory has limitations, especially in oral cultures. So studies show that recalling long text verbatim is nearly impossible unless you have a written text to refer back to. Memories degrade over time and can change during oral transmission. It's like the Chinese whispers problem. Recalling traditions will often lead to new compositions, altering the original text. Oral traditions are unstable and will vary greatly without a written text. He says oral cultures do not have a better memory than literate cultures. Literacy actually improves memory retention and accuracy because, again, you can refer back to the historical text. Shoemaker says that the preservation of the Quran relied on written documentation for accuracy over time. Of course, there were numerous variations, and he says scientific studies have shown that lengthy verbatim recall of a text of 50 or more words in the absence of a written text has never been documented. There is no evidence of that. This indicates that the ability to memorize and recall extensive texts is significantly constrained in oral cultures, reinforcing the argument that memorization alone cannot account for the memorization and the preservation of the Quran. Your thoughts on that? I'll hand over to you again.
Well, I mean, I completely agree because I also had a discussion with Chat on, the oral tradition and memorization, and it basically came to the same conclusion. I mean, memory is not linear. Our memories can be influenced, by our biases, by other knowledges that we acquire as we're growing up. As we age, our memories, it's not as good. And you're talking about, people that are hundreds of years later, supposedly, remembering what somebody said 200 years before it. Now, here's one good example. You ever notice, especially this happens in the Quran. Let's say you're reading a legend. Somebody writes a story about something that happened, let's say in the 7th century, right? So he gives his details. 200 years later, you read the same story, but now it's got all these extra details. So my question is, how did the guy 200 years have more details in his version than the guy who was actually there? That's what we call embellishment, right? As time grows, especially
Yes.
with legends and stories, right? The superhero has one power when he starts, by the time you read it 300-400 years later, now the dude or the gal's got 10 superpowers. Well, what happened? How did he gain the other, superpowers? We don't know, right? This is basically Chinese whispers. In a court of law, I would have it thrown out as hearsay because you can't prove it. Now, Chat said, now, and this is also based with scholarly work, which I'm going to be putting all this stuff that I'm doing with Chat, I will have available. I'm going to put them together like little, I wouldn't say a book, like maybe a pamphlet, 20, 30, 40 pages. And then later on, I will compile everything into a huge volume so people could have access to this. So I'm not doing anything that you can't do, but I would advise people, and you and I talked about this, and you gave me some great ideas. In order to use Chat, you have to know what you're doing because Chat, now it's not purposely lying to you, but Chat is using the material that's in their database, and Chat can be biased. It is biased when it comes to the Islamic sources. It is making up excuses using the standard Islamic narrative. So if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to assume that Chat is right. And let me tell you, it's not. I have had to correct Chat. Why? Because I know the material that I'm having a conversation with Chat. So I can tell Chat, hey, Chat, give me the translation of chapter 15:9. I know Chat is going to give me the translation that has the word Quran. But I know in the Arabic, there's no such thing as the word Quran. It's reminder. So then I have to correct Chat. I'm like, Chat, there's no word Quran. Chat comes back and says, yes, you're right. I'm sorry. Let me give you the correct translation. So you have to go back and forth. So you have to be careful.
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, do you want to go on with the? Um, I typically like to go hour and a half on my
Okay.
streams. I mean, occasionally I'll go for a couple of hours, but yeah, maybe you just want to go through chapter one because this is actually really interesting. There's so much. I mean, we can do so many tangents from where you
Oh
are.
yeah.
You know, it's so easy giving you material here. I mean, the coins. That's an entire series of episodes on their own.
Yeah. I
You
mean,
know.
I think you had him on your show recently, Odin LaFontaine.
I had him on was it last night?
Yeah, it was just recently. Yes. So I love his material. I've interacted with him. Listen, I would highly recommend people to join academia. That I think it's EDU because that's where all the scholars hang out. Shoemaker, Odin LaFontaine, Dan Brubaker, and you get a wealth of information. These are scholarly works. These are people's thesis for the PhD. You'll get scholars like Ahmed Al Jalad. I mean, the information that I have
Yeah.
acquired from being a member, I'm very well known on there. I don't know why. My name is very popular on there, but you can get, for me, it's only dealing strictly with Islam.
Mm,
You can get a lot of stuff from these scholars. Old
yeah.
LaFontaine, I can't remember what his name is, but his last name is Professor Kerr. So all these
Yes,
people,
Robert Kerr. Yeah.
yes, yes, all these people are there. You can read their stuff. Sometimes they even give away books free, like Shoemaker gave away his Creating the Quran. I got it from academia. You can interact with these guys, right? As a matter of fact, Odin
Yeah.
one time gave me a compliment a long time ago. I never had a chance to interact with him, but Saint Murad, right?
Yeah, I've had him on a few times.
Yeah, he came
I
on. He did a surprise pop in. I think it was 2 or 3 live streams ago. He actually came into my live stream. I thought it was a fake account, but it turned out it was him. Mel dropped by, not on the live stream, but on the chat. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the information is out there if you're willing to put the time together. I'm not doing anything different. This is not my research. I'm using the available tools that are provided, and Lloyd gave me some other tools that I'm going to be looking into. And I'm just asking, I'm having a dialogue with chat, right? I'm getting information, and then then I have chat put this information so that you guys can have access to it. So you don't have to do 20, 30, 40, 50 hours of work, right? Because if I put together all my conversations with chat, it would be over 1,000 pages. So what I do is I take the important points and I put them together. I guarantee you there's more than 15 arguments because
right.
just on the isnats, I have something that I just put together. It's 24 pages, and that's just on the reliability of the isnats. I think memorization is probably 10 or 15 pages, which I don't really have here. But let's at least go through the 15, and I think we can call it a day. So we stopped at the coins, right? All right. So number 5, Umayyad desert castles. So basically, what the scholars and historians are saying is that if you look at the architectural remnants of the Umayyad period, you'll see you don't see Islam, right? You'll see elements of what we now consider Islamic practice, but it's just an implication that we could say, okay, that could be early Islam. Then we have the papyri from Egypt, 7th century. Okay, it does use a phrase like Bismillah in the name of God. Again, suggesting Islamic identity. In a court of law, suggesting does not work. Okay, we can't assume that just because it says Bismillah in the name of God. My question would be, okay, in the name of God, what is that God say?
Hold on a moment. I really don't like when Muslims typically say God because they know that God refers to the Christian God and they're trying to usurp the Christian God to be Allah.
Yeah,
Whereas really it's in the name of Allah, which is a proper name.
yeah. And we don't have
So,
any reference to a God or a creator called Allah. All the records that we have would be,
mhm,
going back to the Hebrew scriptures. Yahweh. Over 6,600 or 6,800 times, God tells Moses, this is my name. This is my name
yeah.
forever. So if his name is forever, when did God's name become Allah? Because if it's a
Yeah,
name, they have a problem. If it's a title, they have a problem. Okay, the God. Okay, which God? I don't
Why is
know.
Yahweh never mentioned in the Quran then?
But it's funny because the prophets that are mentioned in the Quran, if you look at their names and their meaning, the Hebrew meaning, it points to Yahweh. It's not Allah. Now, one Muslim said, oh, yeah, but the Quran says all the best names refer to Allah. Man, that is a cop out because we know the 99 supposed names of Allah. Yahweh is not one of them. So they have to prove that people worship this creator called Allah. Another problem is the Quran makes a prophet out of anybody. We don't know of a prophet named Lot. We don't know of a prophet named Ishmael. We know they're in the Old Testament, but they've never been prophets. How can you be a prophet and nobody writes about these people as prophets? I find that to be problematic. You cannot have a book that comes in the 8th, 9th century claiming, oh yeah, Lot was a prophet, Ishmael was a prophet. Who were they prophets to? Where can we find people? We can find Moses in the Old Testament. We can find Daniel. We can find, well, actually, the Quran kind of screws up with Prophet Zechariah because in the Quran, Prophet Zechariah is the father of John the Baptist, which that's not true. There's about 500-year differences. So you need to approach Muslims when you're dealing with them as if you're a lawyer. Ask questions that a lawyer would ask. This is why I was raised up on Christian Prince. I love Christian Prince. He thinks like a lawyer, right? Whatever a Muslim says, I am paying attention because I'm going to turn around and use it against them. I like the model because I also was going to be in law enforcement. Anything you can say will be used against you in the court of law. So if you pay attention, you will learn these things. All right, so we left off. All right, archaeological evidence of the Negev Desert. Okay, it says some mosques and settlements in the Negev from the late 7th century are oriented towards Mecca, which do not imply early Islamic presence. Now, here's the problem because Dan Gibson makes no mentions of this. So I think this is an error because he didn't find any mosques for the first 100 years oriented towards Mecca. So I think this still has, quite a bit of the Islamic standard narrative. I'm going to have to dig into that. And the reason I say this is I have Dan's book. I could not find anything about, these mosques. Talks about the Armenian Chronicles again, 660s, only 28 years after Muhammad. All right. Now they say that this source is probably a tribute to Sabaeus. Mentions the Arab prophet. We don't know who this Arab prophet is. Notice it doesn't say the Muslim prophets. It's got some aspects that have been interpreted as referring to Muhammad. Yes, a lot of these things are just assumptions. Jacob of Edessa, 692. All right, it's a Syriac source. Notice where all these people come from. They come from up north. They're not coming from Mecca in Medina area. It mentions the Arab prayer practices oriented towards Mecca. 692. I don't think Mecca is even mentioned until 741. So I would have some problem. This is not, ladies and gentlemen, this is not etched in stone. You can still do your own research.
Right. Tell me something. You said you've conducted numerous debates, and I've watched a few as much as I can deal with. But
yeah,
do Muslims provide solid, verifiable, historically founded answers to this? My issue with academics, you mentioned Ahmad Al-Jalad earlier, who's a very good academic, and he gives some brilliant talks, has done some fantastic research, made great discoveries. He presents information that is often amazing, and he comes to conclusions that are obviously just crap.
Right.
Because he'll say, we've got a book called the Quran. We actually found a copy, but it's dated from 932, and it was written by a guy called James Smith from England. And we've actually got the ink stamp on page 3, oddly enough, and it shows the library. He's got his library card as well. Then on top of that, we've actually got a reference from King Willie Nelson of Greece from 1132 that says he actually paid scribes to add a couple of chapters to this Quran book, which he found in a junkyard sale in whatever. You'll come up with all of these things, and then he'll say, now, given all of this evidence, it's obvious that the Quran narrative is 133% exactly true, just like Muslims say. And you're like, how can you go from that evidence to that conclusion? And many academic scholars are guilty of this. Because, look, I can understand they don't want to be killed in the parking lot on the way to their
Yep.
car after giving a lecture. I mean, I get that. Or they don't want to lose their $5 million a year endowment that goes to their department. The university would not like them very much. I get that. But so I have this particular issue with some of these academics, that they how they draw the conclusions based on the evidence, because they have the dots, they just will not connect them.
And Dr. J. Smith made a good point. He said, because I told you I'm finishing up these two books from the German scholars, and he says that the German scholars have known all of this stuff for at least 100 years, but nobody wants to come up because, like you said, hey, you're gonna get you might not make it past the parking lot, or you lose your grant money, or like for instance, when Patricia Crone came out with the Make and Trade route, which went against the narrative, especially of Montgomery Ward, which he believed Mecca was in and some major trade routes.
Right.
It didn't go too well for her. She got death threats. She had to move to another university. Right? Some people don't get so lucky. What's his name? The guy who wrote the Satanic Verses, didn't go too well for him. Right? So
Yeah.
you see what happens. So people, even
Salman Rushdie.
even the Orientalists, even though, like you said, they have all the dots, they don't. At the end of the conclusion, they still use the standard Islamic narrative. But like in the early Islam, if you look at the conclusion that these five scholars, historians came to the conclusion, they actually say, hey, listen, based on the evidence, it shows that these people, these Umayyad rulers, they were Christians. The Quran and Islam was a historical development of over at least 200 years. Hopefully, now one of these scholars, you probably know him, is Luxemburg. Christoph Luxemburg, yep. the guy from the Syro-Aramaic, Quran. That's not his name, ladies and gentlemen. You saw what they did to the guy Luling, basically destroyed the man's career. He got back credibility when Dr. J. Smith took his work and translated it to English. And now it's a book that you can get. It's not, why do you think I don't show myself? You know Eric, my buddy from the Cross and the Crescent.
Right.
I mean, I'm not afraid of being killed because, listen, I'm in America. I'm in a hillbilly place. We like our guns. But it's just that they will go after your job, right? Just like they did Eric. They will call your boss, and if you work for the government or if you work for any kind of government job, like if you're a teacher, they will get you fired. Now, do I want to deal with that? Hell no. Now, do I need to show my face?
Which is shocking because Islam's the religion of peace.
Yes. I mean,
shocked.
It's the only religion of peace that will kill you to prove you it's peaceful. So I don't want to deal with that. I say God bless, God Logic, Chris Claus, yourself, all these people that are out there, right? But I personally don't want to deal with the stuff. Like I said, I ain't worried about dying. I know where I'm going, if I'm killed. And let me tell you, I'm going to send a few people to get 70 to see if they get the 72 virgins. But I don't want to have to deal with my boss, right? Especially if your boss is liberal.
I understand.
And, so
no, it makes sense. TJ Bowman is immune to being fired. I envy you.
Yes, and I also work for myself now. So who are you going to fire me from? But still, I don't want to have to deal with it, right? And
no, understood. I mean, there's a risk. There's a risk to that, and I mean, we all know that things can go very, very wrong, and we understand that we are potentially under threat. But that said, more and more of us are becoming expert at this. More and more of us are speaking out, making our presences known on social media.
Yeah.
And I was saying earlier, Muslims do they give solid, hard, verifiable evidence to defend against all of the evidence that you've presented here, right? These facts of the different Qurans, of the different verses with contradictory verses. Do they provide solid, hard evidence, or do they just come on the channel in the chat and say things like, Jesus was a Muslim?
Well,
Or
actually, to be honest, I have not started debating this aspect of it. I have been debating for like 12 years on is the Quran the words of Allah, and is it true, and it has no mistakes. So I have 52 pages to show that the Quran is just another book written by men, right? I show all the inconsistencies, the historical errors, the scientific errors, the grammar errors. But this particular topic, no, I have tried it on TikTok, and no, they don't have anything.
yeah,
They
because I've
don't have
I've
a clue.
asked. I mean, the one time, because I don't have the patience for these debates and things, because like we
Right.
all know they're going to lie. You all know
Yeah.
they're going to play word games. I mean, for instance, I had Menj, the Muslim apologist, on MENJ, the Muslim apologist, on, and we had 2 months to prepare, as I recall. I think he had like 2 months to get ready. And when he came on, and I said, okay, look, let's talk about the Sharia. Here's this from the Sharia. Here's multiple sources stating these things. And he goes, well, I don't know because I don't have my references and I need to look that up. And I had sent him all of the information, said, here's the topic, here's what we're discussing, these are the references. I will give you every single source I'm going to use. You have access to every book I'm going to reference. And these are the topics that I'm going to go through. So he knew exactly what I was going to do. There were no gotchas, there were no surprises. I gave him all the information up front so that he could get ready. And then the excuse was, well, I didn't prepare. Oh, I don't have my book. Oh, gee whiz, I don't have that available. That resource is not here. And then he said, oh, my scholar, but I follow a different scholar. We follow a different scholar here in Malaysia who does not agree with Al Azhar. He has different conclusions to Al Azhar. Well, oddly enough, the scholar that he's referring to got his PhD at Al Azhar.
Yeah.
So like, okay, so you follow a guy who got his PhD at Al Azhar, who is well respected by Al Azhar, who apparently has a completely different Islam than Al Azhar. And then Al Azhar doesn't have authority. Oh, but they made the 1924 Quran and the 1925 Quran. So they have the authority to canonize the Quran, but they have no authority in Islam. It's like, so yeah, it's just a waste of time. It's for me that, yeah, I mean, it's obvious to anyone with a brain that Islam is completely false. They don't have answers for this. From the historical method destroys Islam. It really does.
Well, I mean, I have had Muslims tell me, "Oh, we don't care about history or science." As a matter of fact, recently a Muslim told me when we were discussing science, right? Because they love to claim that the Quran has embryology, and that's one of my topics. Is if the Quran says something, like for instance, women have sexual fluids from their breast area, and science says that that's not true, we don't care about the science because Allah knows best, dude. I mean, anybody with a rational mind would say, what do you mean you don't care? So they basically don't care about evidence. They fabricate evidence. I've seen Muslims, I've busted them. I've done little clips on them where they'll give you a source. Now, they're very good. Like, for instance, I debated a Muslim called Central Dawah on Muhammad being in the Bible according to the Quran. I mean, and when it came to Muhammad being a comforter, he threw out all of these so-called scholars and stuff like that. Listen, this was not a pre-planned debate. It was not formal. Nobody knew what the arguments were. I like to do Christian Prince. We'll get up there, 3 minutes apiece. I don't have time to double check those sources, but I have seen him in other debates mention a certain book and a certain page, and it said a certain thing. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? I have the book. What do? I go to the book, I go to the page, and guess what? It doesn't say what he's saying. But who's going to challenge him on that? Nobody, unless you have the book handy. Now, I could do this because this was after the debate, so I can go and look at the source. But if I was debating him, I don't have that source available, right? So you do have to be careful. But they don't have any sources. Their argument is, trust me, bro. Oh, I'll get you the source. I'm still waiting 2 years later for Muslims to send me the sources that they claimed existed. They don't. And that's
Yeah.
probably why after you sent them all of your sources, he's like, oh, wait a minute. I don't have a counter to this guy. Let me make up some excuses. Where were we? Okay, so the
Yeah.
Doctrinal Jacoby,
Yeah. Let's go
634.
to 15 and maybe call it a wrap, and then
Yeah,
we can
that's it.
always
That's
chat
it. Yeah, yeah,
again in
yeah.
the week. We can always do
Just
another talk in the week. I will have time this week.
yeah.
It's just that everyone, just to, by the way, Dr. Kufar Phobia's links have been posted in the chat. I
Yes, thank
believe they're
you.
in the description. Please do go to his channel. And we did discuss off camera that if we didn't finish this, we would come back and do this again. And there's 7 chapters, or
Yeah,
eight,
7
seven
chapters,
chapters
and
plus conclusions. So, and
we
I don't
haven't
want
even
to
got
rush
past
through
the first
this.
one.
Yeah, I don't want to rush through the material. It's
Yeah.
because these are all facts that you can use. These are bite-sized and these can be expanded upon, and these are really, really useful for apologetics and for polemics, and I think it's a great reference source. So hence I don't want to rush, and I'm happy to do like 7 chapters with 7 shows if you're willing to do that.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. If we can schedule a time, like I said,
Dr. K.
I'm relatively free right now. Hey, Sister Dragon and Andrew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and guys, also, as always, if you'd, please like, share, subscribe if you like what you're hearing, if you like the content. And for those of you who have supported the channel, thank you very much. Everything goes a long way. I just want to share a small story. So for the next 3 months, I'm busy renovating a place that we've bought here in Poland. And of course, Poland, which, as you know, loves immigrants. Yeah, has this. Well, anyway, Poland does not, even legal ones like me. So the Polish government makes my life very, very difficult. So for the next few months, I've got a lot of running around and things to do while moving. So it's going to disrupt my schedule because we've got to be renovating. It's like 3 months worth of work. So I won't be able to, I've got to be going to see builders and building materials and blah, blah, blah. So I've got a lot of things happening at the moment and there's a lot going on. So yeah, I'm trying to stream as much as I can. And I've also my work. I've been in this new job for just under a year and a half now. So things are picking up and my travel schedule's picking up and I've got a lot of things to do. So yeah, occasionally I have to take breaks because I've got work priorities. But I stream as much as I can. And yeah, for those of you who supported the channel, thank you. Those donations you've made make a huge, huge difference. The simple reason is that because there's someone I actually will be bringing on the channel, and just so you know, because of my status as a foreigner, despite my credit history, etc., I cannot access things like finance here in Poland. So couldn't get a home loan. So my wife and I were forced to purchase this property with cash, which means that you work out what it costs to purchase a property with cash when the bank refuses. That's a long story of its own to give you finance. And of course, now I also have to do renovation, maintenance of the place. We bought a bit of a fixer-upper, which saved us some money. And that's also going to be just cash. So basically everything that I have is going into this, because as one bank said, it's a long, ugly, disgusting story about Poland. It's a lovely place, has its problems, but I'm a flight risk, you see, because the bank, you apply for a bank loan, the bank pays the owner, you pay the bank back, but according to the way these people think, I'm a flight risk. I will take the money and run. I don't know what money I'd run with because I don't get the money. The seller, sorry, gets the money, etc. It's yeah, it's all fun and games. So yeah, so basically my life savings has now had to go into this issue, and yeah, so everything I get has been saved, and yeah, it's been a bonus that I've been able to cover costs on this. Just so you guys know, it's no picnic here in Poland as a foreigner. But there's lots of stories I can tell you because I'm the wrong kind of foreigner. But anyway, sorry about that.
Well, I thought if I had to move out of the United States, Poland was one of my top countries. I guess
you see,
not.
the difference is you're from America. You see, I come from a place
called.
called.
Okay, yeah, okay, I got you. Yeah,
I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but
yeah. But guys, here's the thing: it's like the stuff that we're doing, the stuff that Lloyd does. It takes time, right? He has to study all of this stuff, right? I mean, he's got to read books, and then we do these live shows. So it's not just, oh, let's turn on the camera and do a live show. Just to get to 72 pages, right? And this is bite size. You don't have to go and buy all these books that are referenced here because it's there. It gives you what page or whatever. If you can afford it, you can get them, sure. Why not? But just to get to 72 pages, it's got hundreds of hours of me arguing back and forth with Chat GPT, and then basically just throwing out all the fluff or the stuff that's wrong and putting it there. So it does take time. And I'm an accountant, so there's an old saying, time is money, right? So, and I don't make a penny. I honestly, I don't. I don't make a penny from YouTube. I'm not even monetized. I don't make a penny. Okay, I do make a penny or two on TikTok. But, I'm not doing this for money. I've been doing this for 12 years. Before 2012, I had no clue what Islam was. I had no clue what a Quran was. I had no clue what a Muslim was. And hell, I went to high school next to a mosque. Had no clue. I can thank two of my presidents for getting me involved in Islam. But I've been doing this for 12 years. Am I an expert? No. I had some great teachers. I did look at your stuff much earlier when I first started. Christian Prince, Sam Shamoun, right? I've got all these sources. Like I said, just on Islam alone, I probably have 4,000 books. Right. And they're PDFs because I don't like hard. Well, I have some, but I like the PDFs because I don't have the space, and hardback or paperback are expensive, and I like the PDFs because I can search. I don't have to read 300 pages to find a certain. I can just especially if a Muslim says, "Oh, such and such book says this on page this," I can go to that. I can type in a key phrase, and I can pull it up. Right. I can't do that with a hardcover. Plus, you can make notes and stuff like that. So I do have, just on Islam, probably 4,000. I have screenshots, and I've got a spreadsheet that's huge.
No, it's similar to the collection I have, and I understand. Right. I mean, we have to do this. I mean, I've got a hand-curated collection of about 2,500 items, most of which, 99% of which is accessible to the public in my archive. But yeah, I'm just thinking it's getting a tad, it's going towards the 2-hour mark, and I like to wind down.
Let's just end it right now.
So what I'm thinking is, we could always come back to this, finish the last few during, we can discuss the date and time and do this. And I just 1 or 2 questions someone asked about Poland. Just on this topic, because it's something that really just, it's been incredibly upsetting for the last few months. So, Poland has very strict immigration laws. Poland also doesn't allow illegal immigration. That said, they're not that friendly to even legal immigrants. Now, and also they don't seem to have consistency in applying these laws. So depending where you're from, whether they like you, whatever the case might be, there's not that much consistency. But for instance, someone who came from Switzerland would be treated very differently. Their status would be different to me coming from Africa. Now, Poland has a political situation with the South African government. Now, I get lumped into this big bucket, despite the fact that I am not a representative of the South African government, and they're not dealing with me in any kind of official capacity. They don't look at your personal circumstances, the fact that I'm married, the fact that I have permanent residence, the fact that, for instance, we're purchasing a property with cash. I'm forced to clean out my accounts, life savings, my retirement, all of this, right? Because, I mean, you got 2 weeks and you're getting lies and lies and lies by different banks. You're getting different stories. It's all lies. It's all whatever. And so for instance, I try to apply to my bank where I've had a great deal of money. There's many stories I can tell you. It's a complete disaster, but there's many stories I can tell you. That's it. But I apply to the bank. So you can understand, we're buying a place with cash. There's a lot of money in the bank. So I applied for a personal loan. Now, I've had my accounts with this bank for many years. I've had a lot of money in the account. And the bank says to me that the most money that I can qualify for, the highest that I can qualify for is, I think, $3,000. They're willing to give me a loan, maximum loan, personal loan of $3,000. Now, My salary goes into this account. We have a great deal of money saved there. We were forced to put money in there, etc., etc. Now that's the most that I can get because, thief, gonna steal this money and run away, right? I'm gonna, I don't know, move to Africa, go work for McDonald's, make a lot of money, and live on this $3,000 that the Polish bank gave me. I don't know. You work it out. I can tell you too many stories about the. So yeah, but yeah, $3,000. That's the maximum loan I can get, despite having a full-time job. And I can tell you now, my permanent residence in Poland just means they can't casually throw me out. That's about all it means. It's not valid ID for a great number of things. My bank, I used my permanent residence to make. I went to a new bank, opened a new account. My permanent residence was what I used. ID card was what I used to make the account. And if you check, I can show you. I'll show you at some point on my bank account. It says non-Polish ID, a permanent residence. I can live here for the rest of my life in Poland legally, but a Polish permanent residence card is considered a non-Polish ID. So let's just say they make your life really difficult. They will legally follow the obligations that they have to provide after they've exhausted all other efforts of denying you those things. And they'll make your life difficult. They will confuse things, slow things down. They will just make it as hard as possible for you to do anything. It's all fun, it's all games all the time. So that's life in Poland. So let's say the last 3 months of working through this whole process of purchasing this property, I used to have a very positive view of Poland. Right now, I have a slightly different view, because I realized the problems that I'd been facing were not accidents, they were policy. And the policy seems geared towards, you're from the wrong place. Let's make your life difficult so you'll get on a plane and leave and never come back. That seems to be government policy. I'll leave it at that. Anyway, final word to you, Dr. K. And thanks. This has been really fascinating, been educational.
Well, thank you.
Really
I'm glad that you got me here. I know we talked about doing the show years ago, but because of our time differences, we never got together. But like I said, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make it easy for people who want to get into this. Like I said, I do polemics. I don't do apologetics. So I'm doing the work so that you don't have to do the work. I mean, this is not my stuff. A lot of the stuff that Lloyd uses, or, others like me use, it's out there. You just have to spend the time, know where to look for it. Or with AI now, I mean, AI is great, but you got to know how to use it. If you don't know how to use it, then you're going to get stuff that, there might be some errors. And as you can see, there's a couple ones there that I'm going to have to go back and double check, because that one of them goes against Dan Gibson's his works. And, these AIs, a lot of them, they're biased, depending on the topic. Forget about politics. I guarantee you they're liberal leaning. So you have to be careful where the information is coming from. There's a lot of money put into these systems. One of the things that I've noticed is that the Muslims have pretty much taken over Google Translate. It's no longer
reliable.
I can't rely. I've caught it actually changing things that no longer make sense. So I use another translator that so far hasn't been corrupted yet. So you do have to be careful. Even the online sources like Suna.com,
they change. They delete things. They edit things.
They are whitewashing these things. They're deleting, or they're changing the translation. So if you don't know the Arabic, you're not going to notice. Lucky for me, I know my way around the Arabic, and I have a lot of resources. So it doesn't work on me all the time. But yeah, I have noticed that, there's a lot of stuff that's out against you. If you're dealing with Islam, it's, you really got to know what you're doing, because you're going to meet a lot of walls from even people that you would not think they would put them up, because, let's face it, if you say something that goes against Islam, it could cost you your career, or it could end up costing you your life.
Yeah, but I think they can't kill us all, and B, more and more of us doing this. And I think their threats are becoming less effective.
Yeah.
I think there's more acceptance now in academia to talk about these things. There's more demand for it, and I think the tide is rising in our favor. I mean, Islam is a threat, granted, but I think things are starting to turn around. I think there's a change that's coming.
Yeah. I mean, just look at the German scholars who put these two books together. They're less than 20 years old. Stephen Shoemaker. So people are now they're doing the work that should have been done, right?
Yeah.
Or the conclusions. Here's the
But I think,
dots. Here's the
don't you
evidence.
think we are forcing these scholars to deal with these issues? We're bringing them out into the light. We're
Yes.
bringing them to the open. We're forcing them into the public eye. Scholars begrudgingly are starting to acknowledge these problems.
Yeah, it's like you said. How can you have all this evidence, right, staring you in the face? Now I can understand, Ahmed Al Jalad, but then come to the conclusion that goes totally against the evidence. That's like, all your evidence points that 2 + 2 is 4, but your conclusion says, well, it could mean 2 + 2 is 5. So now the German scholars, people like Odin LaFontaine, the French scholars, people like Shoemaker, people like Dan Brubaker, people like, God bless, Dr. Jay Smith and Al Fadi, they're coming out and they're saying, hey, listen, this is not me. This is the evidence. In a court of law, evidence rules. My opinion doesn't matter. My biases don't matter. It is what it is. If it's in favor of Islam, so be it. If it's not in favor of Islam, so be it. It is what it is.
But fair is only fair if you agree what the rules are. And they have a different standard. They have a different set of rules. Evidence for them and evidence for us are different things. So, there are these issues, and we need to demand that we have a single set of standards of evidence, that we don't simply take things for granted, that they need to be followed using rules of logic, proper rules of whatever their standards of evidence are applied. So yeah, we should call it a night here. And thank you, Labiru. And thank you for TJ Bowman for that donation. Thank you very, very much. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, this has been really fascinating, and definitely let's continue with this, because I think the fact is that it's such a strong list of evidence you're providing. It's well worth discussing. And then, hopefully everyone go out, get the book. I think it's well worth it. If you're in the social media sphere and you're using, information for apologetics, polemics, then this, I think, could be a fantastic resource.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing all the work. Like I said, I'm putting together, like for instance, I'm going to be uploading it. It's just going to be a buy me a coffee. Now, I am thinking of putting this one on Amazon. I have to see if the format is correct. But most of the stuff, it's whatever my interaction with chat, I'm going to be putting it in the format that people could read it. And I'll have it available for download if you want. Somebody wants to make it.
Yeah, send me the info. I'll also put it in a pinned comment later.
Okay.
That I'll do that. So yeah, guys, I should call it a night. And someone asked me about Poland. I mean, I've always said.
Oh yeah, it's late for you, man. It's only like 3:30 here for me.
Yeah, no. So guys, Poland is a beautiful country. It's a really safe country. It's well run in many ways. Things are great. I mean, obviously woke is trying to get in everywhere. The LGBT movement is trying to get in everywhere. I mean, this is just one of those things, but it's still very much a Christian conservative country. It's still logical and sensible. In fact, my nephew, he's 6.5. 7, whatever, he's at school and he does religious instruction 3 days a week. They have like an hour or more, 4 days a week. He does religious instruction, which is fantastic. So, which is missing in a lot of places, right? So that's all good. So there are many positives, but from the government, I'm not saying that the people are necessarily bad, because I work in a company that people are really nice, amazing people, really friendly, accommodating, helpful, can't ask for better. Family, fantastic. But when it comes to government policy and consequent financial policy, like the banks and financial services, they, as far as I can tell, they will screw me up the backside every chance they can get. Because, yeah, that's just how it is. So,
what can you do, man? You got to go with the flow.
Yep, that's how it is. So, I'm not saying like I said, it's not a picnic, but here I am. Right. So, and I don't feel like moving countries again. I've done that so often. I'm not. It's expensive.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's call it a night. Sorry about that little rant.
Well, thank you very much. Bless you and your family, and good luck on the renovation.
yeah, looking forward to finally having a place that, I mean, just the last point. The thing is, it took me 5 years to get my residence visa. Then you have to work for a year minimum to build up a relationship with the bank. Now, I had a bank account, but I'd never had a full-time job because the way that I got my visa, obviously people get married and they get, after enough years, they get a permanent residence. Well, the way that I got my first visa was I sued the government.
Wow.
And why did I sue the government? Because they were slow walking my visa. It's like, oh, can you come back in 30 days? Gee whiz, we just can't seem to find it in the system. And then eventually I went to lawyers and we sued them, because after a certain period, after a certain amount of slow walking, you're allowed to actually sue for loss of income. And that's exactly what I did. And literally 24 hours later, they advised me that, oh, wait, hey, would you believe it?
We
24
found
hours
it.
after we found it, it was in this round file under my desk right next to my foot. I found your visa. So, and when they said, can you come in 2 weeks? So we went 2 weeks later, got my visa. That was nice. Now, of course, the first visa you get is 12 months. Of course, by the time I got it, there was less than 10 months left because they'd actually issued it and they just weren't giving it to me.
So
So
they counted
this is
that
the
against
kind of
you.
mistakes. Sorry?
No, I'm saying they
Say again?
counted those 2 months against you. They had
Yeah.
it.
So, oh, they had it. They just didn't give it to me.
Right.
So this is the kind of mistakes that they make. You know, and it's just constant drag of issues like this. So that's just the way the bureaucracy works here.
Yeah.
So it's just one issue after another. And then of course, now I got it for 10 months, but of course after 7 months I have to reapply. Now during that period, you can't leave the country, you can't travel, you can't work. So what do? You can't
Wow.
travel, you can't work, you can't leave the country. And if you leave, they're not going to let you back in. So yeah, you worked it out. It's all fun and good.
Wow. Man,
So
they definitely putting you through the ringer, man.
oh no, they do. So yeah, guys. So that's Poland. I mean, that's again, like I said, you've got to take the good with the bad. There's a lot of good, but there's some bad here too. So there's lots of stories I can tell. It's just recently it really came to a head, and the experience I had was just so unpleasant, so incredibly unpleasant that it's just something that just it really upsets me right now. It's on my mind. But anyway, guys, thank you very much. This has been really fantastic, Dr. K. Let's please do this again. Been a
Sure.
fantastic talk, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. And
Oh yeah, this was fun. Just let me know when your schedule is open, and I'll check my schedule, and we'll do it again. I did not think we would get even past the first chapter because there's, even though it's 72 pages, there's a lot of
yeah,
information. So we'll come back and we'll get over it. And probably by that time, I'll have even more stuff to present. Because, like I said, I've been doing this I probably have over 1,000 pages, but I'm not putting it together. I'm getting the information, and then I'm putting it into a format that, anybody can pick it up and read it and say, okay. And if they want to have debates like I do with Muslims, then hey, you got your resources. Here's
yeah.
the argument, their argument, your rebuttal, and here's the sources. Makes it a lot easier. You don't have to spend hours and hours and weeks on chats. Um, so I'm just making it easier for people to access the information.
No, it's fantastic. Okay, guys. So thanks. I'm gonna call it a night. It's going on 10 o'clock. Tomorrow's a school day for all of us.
All
So
right.
yeah, guys. Um, wish you well,
We'll see
and
you
thanks,
guys
Dr. K.
later.
I'll catch you.
God bless everybody.
Take care. God bless everyone. Bye.